In the world of fitness, there's a lot of people tell you what the best exercise for fat loss is, or if you go to fitness forums, you see a lot of people asking what the best exercise for fat loss is. And the reason this question is asked so much is that 70% of the world is overweight or obese. So that means fat loss is always the #1 topic in fitness. There are plenty of subtopics that get a lot of attention, but honestly, fat loss is still the #1 thing that people are concerned about when it comes to the fitness media side of things. Currently, a lot of people will blame problems with losing fat on maybe high estrogen levels or gut health. Now, if that was the case, you could go and take an anti-estrogen or some Yakult or another probiotic and you'd suddenly lose fat. So we know straight away, both of those things are total bullshit. So the next question that comes up is, can I spot reduce? Can I just lose fat in one area? Well, this study here that we're going to share on screen shows that a spot reduction midsection workout, so what it was a 27-minute aerobic session done at 70% max heart rate, followed by 4 lots of 4 minutes of various abdominal exercises, was actually less useful for fat reduction than a 45-minute, 70% max heart rate aerobic session. While it shows that trunk fat mass was actually better than in the control group doing the midsection exercises versus the aerobic group, it was only by 0.2%. And yet total fat loss and BMI reduction in the aerobic group were higher than the control group with the midsection exercise. In other words, spot reduction doesn't actually work. What really works is being able to use something that puts out a lot of energy for a long period of time. That's actually the thing that's going to allow you to burn the most fat. And that's because when it comes to fat loss, the #1 thing we need to think about is calories in versus calories out. You'll see people blame all kinds of other things, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is always how much energy you expend versus how much you brought in. Now, 1 kilo of fat has 9,000 calories in it. An hour of weight training for an adult male is somewhere between 300 and 400 calories per hour. Contrast that to an hour of running, which is 600 to 800 calories per hour, or an hour of riding, which is 400 to 600 calories per hour. And you see that weight training from an energy expense point of view is actually about half of what we can get from the same amount of time dedicated to a cardiovascular activity. And that's problematic because what really makes up our energy expense for the day is 4 parts. So the umbrella term is total daily energy expenditure, or TDEE. TDEE is made up primarily of this thing called your base metabolic rate, which is just the amount of energy required just to be you all day long. So if you just lounged around on the couch, it's the energy you expended just breathing, going to the toilet, doing basic metabolic processes that your body needs to do to stay alive. Now, your BMR makes up about 50% of your daily energy expenditure. The next biggest part is what's called NEAT or NEPA. Now, NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and NEPA is non-exercise physical activity. So you can see they're basically interchangeable. That makes up about 30% of your total daily energy expenditure. And this is things like walking the dog, maybe doing some gardening, going grocery shopping, all the physical stuff you do that's not lying on the couch just breathing, but is also not structured exercise. The next part of that is actually structured exercise, and we call this the thermic effect of exercise, or TEE. TEE generally only makes up about 10% of what you do in a given day, unless you're doing many hours of activity a day, like 2+ hours of structured training for the day. So you see, it's only serious endurance athletes or pro athletes who are generally getting high energy costs from their exercise. The final part of it is what's called the thermic effect of food, or TEF, which is about 10% of your total calorie intake. There are ways you can influence that slightly. For instance, a high protein diet will make that number slightly higher, whereas a high carbohydrate, high fat diet with relatively low protein might make that number a little bit lower. But you can see the biggest one for the day is our base metabolic rate, and then the next biggest one is NEAT, with structured exercise only being a very small part of it. So if we go back to how many calories you expend with weight training versus how many you can expend with a cardiovascular activity, you can see that if I'm trying to expend as much energy as possible to allow me to burn through fat stores as quickly as possible, I really need to be picking from something that's a cardiovascular activity, not a weight training activity. Now, muscle does burn more calories at rest than fat does, but not by as much as you think. You'll see this touted a lot in fitness media, people telling you that add muscle, you'll burn more fat. You will, but it's only 6 calories more per hour. Now, having more muscle allows you to work harder during exercise, but again, exercise is usually for most people at best an hour a day, and it only represents about 10% of your total daily energy expense. What's going to make a much bigger difference is expending as much energy as possible versus the Peaslee 6 calories per hour more you get from having added 1 pound of muscle. So if you do the math, if I wanted to burn even 50 calories more per day, I need to gain something like 8 or 9 pound of muscle, 4+ kilo of muscle to even burn 1 extra apple's worth of energy per day. I can tell you now from experience, it's really hard to gain 4 to 5 kilo of muscle. That's 1 to 2 years of hard work. So if we're looking to do some kind of activity that allows us to burn more energy, while muscle building will play a part in it, that's a really long-term strategy. You need to have a strategy for right now that allows you to burn as much energy as possible and access all those fat stores you've accidentally built up over time. So how do we do effective fat loss training? There are a number of strategies. My preferred one, because it's the easiest one, which means there's less barriers to doing it, you won't hate doing it, it's not terribly unpleasant, is to use fat max training. Now, fat max is a point on your effort curve where you're using the most amount of fat and carbohydrate use is very, very low. For most guys in my age group, that's gonna be somewhere in the sort of 110 to 125 beats per minute zone. So you can sit on an exercise bike, walk on a treadmill, even skip rope if you remember back to my cardio video, because that's a very effective way to train in that fat max zone and get a lot of work done. Now for effective fat max training, we need to go for at least 20+ minutes, but even better, more like 45 minutes or so, because at the 40-minute mark, there's a significant uptick in the amount of fat that you actually use. And then we want to be able to do this every single day. These are best done as separate sessions, not before or after sessions. You can do that, but best results are as separate sessions. So you do your fat max workouts fasted in the morning and then not eat for another hour afterwards. Then later in the day, you would hit your regular gym sessions, and they'd all be separated because that allows you to do them more effectively and fuel each workout properly to get the right result from them. These next few protocols I've totally stolen from Lyle McDonald. He actually has a book on this subject called the Stubborn Fat Loss Protocol. You can find it at his website, bodyrecomposition.com. Lyle is one of the biggest experts on fat loss and hypertrophy training in the fitness industry today. And I admire him greatly because he's not full of crap like most people in the fitness industry. He's heavily research-based and quite prepared to change his opinion on something, unlike most people who are just trying to sell you their next book or whatever their program happens to be. So go to bodyrecomposition.com if you want to buy the book on these, but I'll give you the synopsis on the first of these 3 protocols right now. All of these protocols are best done fasted first thing in the morning, and 30 minutes prior, you're going to take caffeine, L-tyrosine, and this other thing called yohimbine. Yohimbine is quite difficult to find in Australia. In fact, it's illegal, but I understand for overseas viewers, you might be able to source this more readily. It starts with a 5 to 10 minute easy warm-up on the cardiovascular method of your choice. So this is bike, this is row, this is maybe incline walk. You can run, but you're going to find that it's quite difficult to do this with running. It's going to be much easier with another form of cardiovascular activity. And you're going to start with a total of 10 minutes of interval work. So that could be 10 lots of 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds easy. Could be 5 lots of 1 minute on, 1 minute off. RPE around 7 to 8. So these are hard efforts, but not all out efforts. You're then going to take a 5-minute complete rest, and you're going to do 20 to 40 minutes of steady state activity at an RPE of 7 to 8. So this is going to be around sweet spot if you're a cyclist. 85 to 90% of your FTP. If you're a 10K runner, it's going to be about 90% of your 10K pace. This is a relatively difficult 20 to 40 minute run where you're comfortably uncomfortable. This is definitely not an all-day jogging kind of pace in terms of effort. Then you're going to cool down and you're going to not eat for another hour after. The second of the Stubborn Fat Loss protocols is exactly the same as the first, except for a couple of minor tweaks. So we're going to do the same 5 to 10 minute warm-up. We're going to use the same caffeine, L-tyrosine, and yohimbine 30 minutes prior. We're going to do it fasted. The difference is now instead of doing 10 minutes of 7 to 8 RPE intervals at the start, you're going to do 5 minutes of 9 to 10 RPE work. Now, a 10 RPE is an all-out effort. So these are very, very short sprints, 10 to 15 seconds on a 45-second recovery, and we're going to do 5 of those. If you are supremely aerobically conditioned, maybe you could bump this up to 8 to 10. But honestly, most people would be better off doing less and harder than trying to do more and slightly easier, because we really need these to be very, very high intensity. Then 5-minute complete rest. Go into 20 to 40 minutes of very easy cardiovascular activity. This is 3 to 4 RPE. This is that fat max effort that I was talking about before. Then we're going to finish with another 5 to 10 minutes of longer intervals, like in the first protocol. So this will be 10 lots of 30-30. This will be 5 lots of 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off. And then again, you're going to wait an hour to eat afterwards. There are a couple of cautions involved with this. Diet is still number one. That is the very first caution. None of these will have significant impact on how much body fat you have if your diet is not controlled. You must be in a calorie deficit to see good results from any kind of fat loss protocol. This is no different. The second is that if I had my preference, I would always choose option number one, which is the Fat Max daily style of 20 to 45 minutes of very easy cardiovascular work to help people keep their body fat under control. Would always be my preference to use number one. When you're planning how many intervals to do, I would always prefer people to do less and harder and shorter versus longer, rather than try to do more but make them too easy and ineffective from doing so. Always pick shorter and harder over longer and easier, and always pick less and harder over more and easier. Remember that 10 minutes of hard intervals is a very, very hard effort. I can't actually do 10 minutes of very hard 30-30s. I can get to 7 or 8 minutes if I'm putting in a hard effort. So I'm going to guarantee that most people will really struggle with 10 minutes of 30-30 as an example. Even 5 minutes of 1 minute on, 1 minute off is very, very difficult to do. So always pick shorter and harder over longer and easier, or less reps over more reps. And then finally is how many times per week we structure this. Most people only need 2 to 3 times per week of this. If you really want to maximize the entire thing, you would do the Fat Max workouts 7 days a week. You'd do these structured fat loss workouts, either protocol 1 or protocol 2, another 3 times per week, and hit your weight workouts another 3 times. If your diet is calorie controlled at this point and you're hitting, now you've got 10 fat loss specific workouts during the week, you are going to see tremendous results very, very fast from this. I know that when I'm doing something like this, even 5 days a week, my fat loss results and my body composition are the leanest they ever are, unless I'm on a very, very calorie controlled diet, eating very small amounts of food. I can stay almost that lean just following a protocol like this 5 days a week, let alone 7 days per week. When we look at all the research on interval training, what you see is it's very, very draining and people can't stick to it for long periods of time. Somewhere around the 4 to 6 week mark is going to be about the maximum you can stay on this, so don't waste your time on this protocol not having your diet up to scratch. Make sure that your diet is locked down, you're tracking everything accurately, because when you look at the studies on things like the Tabata study and participant comments post-study, what they say is that it was so draining they would never repeat that protocol ever again. So if you're going to do it once and get the maximum effect from it, you have to have your diet under control just to make sure that you don't waste your time and just burn yourself out for no particular reason. Now, I understand that everything I've gone over here sounds like there's a lot of information and there's a lot of moving parts. If you've got questions, make sure to ask them below so I can help you out with anything you're struggling with.